I want to give you a little bit of an overview about how these online lectures are going to be structured. Every lecture is broken up into smaller sub-lectures, each one related to an individual learning outcome. So for example, on the screen in front of you, you'll see that for this unit, or this module, there are 3 learning outcomes. Each mini lecture will cover one of these learning outcomes. So we're first going to talk about how we can define and describe the field of biological psychology, or what we sometimes call neuroscience. We're going to analyze the historical progression of theories about the nervous system. And lastly, in this module, we'll talk about the major research methods that are used in biological psychology and what that tells us about human brain function. So first of all, biological psychology is an interdisciplinary field as much as psychology in general is. It's a branch of psychology that focuses mostly on the biological foundations of behavior, emotions, and mental processes. As you may remember from your Psychology 1 or your general psychology course, psychology is the study of the human brain, mind, and behavior. Biological psychology focuses on some of the smaller units that may be related to that kind of mental processing. The goal of biological psychology is to identify the relationships between brain and behavior, and in fact, in the last 100 or 120 years, we have been incredibly successful at identifying what some of those relationships are, as we will talk about throughout this course. And the subfield of biological psychology often incorporates psychology, biology, chemistry, medicine, mathematics, engineering, computer science, robotics, philosophy, and a variety of other fields. As you'll start to see as we move through this course, you'll start to see some of these things hopefully become clear. So think about this, come back to this idea, as we will multiple times in the course. First of all, when we think about biological psychology, if you ever have, my guess is that the way you think about it is the study of the brain, right? It's what we think of as neuroscience. But in fact, biological psychology is made up of a host of subfields that are listed here on the screen. So yes, it does include neuroscience, right? So understanding the brain, the cells that make up the nervous system, and both central and peripheral nervous system, as we'll talk about. But actually, biological psychology also includes a field of study called behavioral endocrinology, which is the study of how hormones are related to behavior. So whether that's about testosterone or estrogen, progesterone, or cortisol, right? You all have an inherent theory about the link between hormones and your own behavior and other people's behavior. So we'll sort of touch on this actually in the course. Third, biological psychology includes the study of behavioral genetics, which is looking at how genes are related to behavior. This is a highly mathematical field. In addition to its research in genetics and biology, we'll talk a little bit about this actually in the course, but understanding what genes are related to what brain functions or what hormones and how those are related to behavior is an important part of biological psychology. Fourth is animal behavior. This is my favorite actually, because it just happens to be my field of study. Animal behavior, or sometimes called comparative psychology, because it compares human and non-human animals to see similarities in behavior that may exist between those human and non-human animals. And in fact, you can see here, these are New Caledonian crows in the lower part of the screen. New Caledonian crows are highly intelligent. You probably have seen some videos displaying some of their behavior. We'll talk a little bit about them actually in this course. New Caledonian crows use sticks that they fashion into hooks to get out grubs from deep inside trees, which allows them to survive. And in fact, the young of the New Caledonian crow, which is the one pictured here with its mouth open, stay with their parents for over 1.5 years to learn how to fashion these hooks to be able to feed themselves. So understanding the basis of that is important for understanding both human and non-human behavior. Lastly is the more recent field of evolutionary psychology. Evolutionary psychology is the study of how human behavior may have changed over evolutionary time. So what about our behavior has been shaped by evolutionary forces tens of thousands or even millions of years in the past? In fact, part of biological psychology is that it really is focused at looking at the parts of an organism. So biological psychology tends to favor what we think of as reductionistic thinking. Reductionistic thinking, or reductionism, is looking at a complex thing, for example an organism, and by trying to understand it by examining its smallest parts. So for biological psychology, this is trying to understand the biological causes of behavior. So if I talk to you, if somebody suggests, oh, someone in my family has schizophrenia, I guarantee that for many people, the first thing they start thinking about are the genes and the chemicals that may be involved in that kind of behavior. That's only a piece of what goes into schizophrenia, right? Schizophrenia is also, the symptoms of schizophrenia are made worse or better based on social stressors, based on the culture you live in, a variety of other things that are not just about the biology of it. Okay, these are TD monkeys. They're a monogamous New World monkey from South America. They form long-term pair bonds. For those of you that have taken my Psychology 25 course, we've talked about this. TD monkeys form male-female long-term pair bonds to help them care for the young. If we're trying to understand monogamy in TD monkeys from a reductionistic perspective, we may be interested in understanding the hormones and the brain regions that make them monogamous, right? I know they look like little adorable gremlins if you've ever seen the movie Gremlins. TD monkeys are really adorable, but in fact they also help us to understand some of the biological basis of monogamy and pair bonding, and in fact parent-child relationships. Again, as we'll come back to and talk about more later in the course. These first couple of lectures, I'm going to say that a lot. Hey, we're going to come back to this and get into more detail about this later. So reductionism, as I mentioned, focuses on the smaller parts of an organism. So at the highest level, areas of sociology or anthropology might be focused on looking at ecosystems, society, culture, maybe even small groups of individuals and what causes their behavior. Psychology, on the other hand, in general may focus on small groups and how that triggers people's behavior or relates to behavior. They may focus on how the individual triggers their own behavior, and maybe some areas of psychology will start to focus on the brain regions and the cells. These last two at the bottom of the screen, that's really where biological psychology comes in, whereas individual psychology focuses on this middle area, and social psychology might focus on some of these small groups or maybe the role of culture, and then anthropology and sociology are probably functioning looking at these upper level kinds of forces. Okay, so biological psychology tends to be very reductionistic because it's focused on these lower levels. But in fact, actually, by looking at these reductionistic processes, by looking at and understanding the brain, that actually can help us understand some of those higher level processes. So let's look at an example of where brain science can help us to understand culture by looking at the example of mirror neurons. Mirror neurons are neurons that allow us to mimic the behavior of other people. They allow us to metaphorically put ourselves in somebody else's shoes, to actually imagine what it would be like, so we can watch somebody conducting a behavior and we can mimic that behavior. V.S. Ramachandran has suggested that these mirror neurons, which are really only found in non-human primates and human primates, are what have helped to shape culture and society. So you'll find a link here that talks about how those neurons might have shaped civilization. You'll find it right below this video.